Am I going to mess something up if I move this music? I am? Okay, well, it's going. Had your turn up here, it's my turn. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just teasing. But not really, no, you're right. If you want to turn to Genesis chapter 37, if you enjoy flipping through your pages and reading through lots of different places, today is your day. We're gonna go through a lot of scripture, and if you don't enjoy that, you can just look at the screen. Hopefully, I'll be up there. I want to, just by way of kind of taking a temperature check here, how many of you, and there's no trick questions, I'm not going to call you out for anything, how many of you are familiar with the story of Joseph? All right, so that's a pretty good number. How many of you would say you're familiar with the story of David and Goliath? Keep your hands up. I think more people know David and Goliath. Now be honest on this one. How many of you know the story of David and Ahithophel? You should raise your hand. All right, we've got a couple. Okay, now here's the two rules for this. Number one, if you know, you can't ruin it for anybody else. Rule number two, which is what applies to most of you, no cheating, no Googling, all right? No Google searches, because it'll take you half an hour to figure out how to spell Ahithophel before you find anything. I've mentioned when I was up here before, I grew up in church, grew up in a Christian school, went to a Christian college. I've been around preaching, Bible teaching, Bible study my whole life. And I'm not saying that Ahithophel had never come up, because there's a good chance I was not paying attention or, hoping to flirt with someone. Notice it wasn't that I was flirting, it was just hoping to flirt. I never really got the courage to ever do that in those days. I didn't meet Amber till I was 21, so that should tell you something. But when I heard this a pastor preach on Ahithophel when I was in college, my mind was like completely blown. I couldn't believe I hadn't heard this story before. And so I want to talk about Joseph, and I want to talk about a lesser known person that's a part of David's life, and who is Ahithophel. As I was preparing this, going through this, there was a thought that just kind of hit me in the face this week that I hadn't really considered before, despite teaching this several times in the past. And I want to share that with you later on. But as we kind of get started with where are we going, Joseph is one story, Ahithophel is a different story. What are we going to talk about here today? When we think about the power of sin and what can happen if we let sin be a part of our lives, we know there's consequences. We know that good things are not coming our way if we allow sin into our life. And so in our human nature, in our human thinking, we get really good at ranking bad sins and powerful sins and kind of these are the really bad ones to stay away from, and here's the ones, well, you might struggle with that, but it's not as bad. All sin is bad, okay? They can all lead to devastating consequences. But the one I want to talk about this morning, the power that is found if you allow this sin to be part of your life, isn't something that I think is talked about as widely as some of what we call bigger ones. And you can fill in those blanks with whatever you want, what you consider the big ones, the really bad ones. But one of the more subtle ones, I believe, is bitterness. Because with bitterness, it's a lot easier to hide that. With bitterness, I can still function in my day and put on my smile, and most people, maybe all people, may not know the bitterness that I have in my heart. What I want to show you today is how bitterness was rejected in the life of one person and the blessing that came from it, but then how bitterness was revealed in Ahithophel and the destruction that came from that. And I want to just show you these accounts in Scripture and then get to the end where we can apply it together. That's the goal. That's what we want to do here this morning. So what is bitterness? What does it mean to have bitterness? What does it mean to be bitter? I looked up some definitions, and I think some practical ways of saying this is just basically bitterness is just refusing to let go of something. A technical definition could be bitterness is an unresolved violation of my justice system. Now, the key there is my justice system. I'm creating my own law in my head of what should happen, and you violated that. And now I'm going to hold that against you. There is wisdom in the movie Frozen. You need to let it go, okay? Where's Frank, man? That was my moment right there. Okay. How old's that movie? Like 40 years old now, something like that. Somehow it's been reintroduced to my children as if it's brand new, and I need to let go of that song again, apparently. But we won't let something go. We want to hold on to something. Now, it could be something that's happened to you. I mean, anything negative or that has hurt you, you can have bitterness about. Maybe, and this is where things start to get a little deeper, maybe it's something that's happened to someone else that you know and someone that you love. And you look from a distance at their situation and say, wait, that's not fair. That's not right. And that bitterness starts to root in. Why? Why are we bitter? We feel justice has not been served. Again, because it's an unresolved violation of my justice system. We saw that person walk away. We saw that person not get in trouble. We saw that person get what they wanted while leaving broken pieces behind. And so we feel like that's not just, that's not fair. And it's hard to let go of that. Our heart has not forgiven the offender. Whether it was to you directly or to someone you may know, something that you've seen, something that you've heard happened. Bitter people hope for something bad to happen to whoever has offended them. And that's kind of the trail it goes down. It's not just I'm not talking to him anymore. Bitterness starts to go to, I hope he suffers. I'm not just going to stay away from him. I hope something bad happens. And then maybe there comes a point where, and I might be the one that takes care of it myself. See, bitterness just keeps going and going. And bitterness is something that, listen, we can talk about drugs, we can talk about alcohol, we can talk about pornography, we can talk about, again, all the big ones that we list as addictive sins that can hold us and give us those chains that keep us bound. But can I tell you here this afternoon, if you have bitterness in your heart, you are just as bound by chains if you've got bitterness in your heart. And so let's quickly look at Joseph, because a lot of us are familiar with Joseph. I don't want to just glaze right by it, but I want us to see what happens in the life of Joseph. Genesis chapter 37, verse number 23. How is this for a starting point? So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the robe of many colors that he wore. They took him and threw him in a pit. And now verse 28, then Midianite traders passed by, and they drew Joseph up, lifted him out of the pit, and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. How's that for an opening act to a story? How many of you got siblings? How messed up would it be if they stripped you naked, threw you in a pit, waited for people to come by, and then sold you for 20 bucks? I don't know how shekel currency exchanges these days, but you know what I'm saying. By our standards, is that a reason to be bitter at our brother for that? Well, sure. By my standards, that is a definite violation of my justice system. You never find, as you read from Genesis 37 to Genesis 50, you never find that Joseph was bitter toward his brothers, toward his family, toward God. You don't find it. You can read, and we're not going to read all 13 chapters. Somebody say amen. Lunch is coming, right? But bitterness is never mentioned in the life of Joseph. And here's what I think is interesting, and here's kind of something that kind of in my brain of random that just kind of happens when I'm preparing and studying. With Ahithophel and what we're going to look at, it was one thing that got him to have the bitterness in his heart. And he held on to that. And he held on for his entire life. With Joseph, it's almost like he's not going to be bitter because he was sold by his brothers? All right, what else can the enemy throw at him instead? What's the next thing the enemy can throw at him? Oh, that didn't make him bitter either? Well, what else? Satan doesn't care what gets you down. Satan doesn't care what binds you. He doesn't care what it is. He just wants to find what it is that will get you down, that will keep you away from God. And so it's like Joseph just has to go through circumstance after circumstance, but he refuses to be bitter or angry with God. Chapter 39, again, we're just kind of breezing through his story real quick. In chapter 39, verses 19 and 20, as soon as his master heard the words that his wife spoke to him, this is the way your servant treated me, his anger was kindled, and Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined, and he was there in prison. So now, where he's been sold into slavery, and now he's living in this man's house, this man's wife comes on to him, and Joseph basically says, nope, that's not happening, and he bails. I'm out. I want no part of this. Joseph does the right thing. Joseph has the character to say, I will not do this. How could I do this sin against God? That's what Joseph says. And he says, I'm out. I'm not doing that. And so the woman who tried to get him to sleep with her goes to her husband and says, guess what he did to me? And he gets thrown into prison. How many of you feel like by our standards, that's a reason to be bitter at someone, right? So here's another situation. He's now thrown into prison. Now, in chapter 40, verse 23, while he's in prison, there's dreams. And Joseph can interpret the dreams, and he says, hey, when you get back up there, when you get back to your job and you're out of prison, remember me. But what happens? Yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. So now that he's been betrayed, sold, falsely accused, and imprisoned, now he's been forgotten. Again, bitterness could set in. Bitterness. Hey, God, what are you doing? Why are you letting this happen to me? I am trying to do the right thing. Over and over, Joseph is given opportunities to be bitter, but you just don't find it. But in chapter 41, verse 38, things start to turn around. And this verse, if I could borrow a word that Pastor Jeff likes to say a lot, we need to marinate in something here, okay? And Pharaoh said to his servants, can we find a man like this in whom is the Spirit of God? How many of our lives could be described by someone watching and say, who do we know that has the Spirit of God on them like he does, like she does? Man, I hope one day people could see Jesus that much in me. Not because of me or what I can do or what I can say, but because just the life I'm living is so close to him and so in tune with what he wants me to be that people say, that guy's got the Spirit of God on his life. That's not the point of the message, but I wanted to marinate in that for a second, okay? And I thought, that's why he says that so much. That's a good word for that, okay? Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has shown you all this, there's none so discerning and wise as you are. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall order themselves as you command. Only as regards the throne will I be greater than you. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, see, I have set you over all the land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh took his signet ring from his hand and put it on Joseph's hand and clothed him in garments of fine linen and put a gold chain about his neck. And he made him ride in the second chariot. And they called out before him, bow the knee. Thus he set him over all the land of Egypt. Moreover, Pharaoh said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and without your consent no one shall lift up hand or foot in all the land of Egypt. Now obviously we have skipped a lot in this story. But now Joseph is exalted. See, he stayed faithful. He stayed true to what God was doing in his life, and he didn't let bitterness take over in his heart. And here's where we can prove it. If you go to chapter 42, verses 7 and 8, now there's a famine in the land, and Joseph is the one in charge of who gets what. And people are coming to Joseph. And who shows up? In verse number 7, Joseph saw his brothers and recognized them. But he treated them like strangers and spoke roughly to them. Where do you come from, he said. They said, from the land of Canaan to buy food. And Joseph recognized his brothers, but they did not recognize him. Now, let's be real. If he was bitter and he was in prison thinking, if I ever see those guys again, oh, what I'll do if I ever see them again. And maybe, he's going to go straight up Liam Neeson and Taken on those guys, right? Like, I will find you. That's what he might be thinking. Can I say that? I probably shouldn't say. I'm sorry. That was not in the notes, okay? That was not part of my prayer time at all. Sorry. But is that not kind of what we'd be thinking? If someone was angry, if someone was bitter, I'm going to find them. I will find them. I will live for the day I get to execute my revenge on what they did to me. But that's not what he does. We, again, can go through the entire story. We're not going to do it. But when you get to chapter 45, for sake of time, I'll just give you the spoiler alert version. He tells his family. He tells his brothers. And he basically says, listen, don't worry. You meant this for bad, but God meant it for good. Here's what happened. Joseph, rather than having a heart of bitterness, had a heart of forgiveness. He forgave his brothers for what they did, and God used him because of it. Now I want us to turn over to 2 Samuel. I wish this was a happy story to tell. I wish we could turn here and say, let's also look at the forgiveness in the life of Ahithophel. But we're not going to find it. Now, there's a question that probably some of you might be wondering already. Who is Ahithophel? Who is he? Like any good mystery, that's not going to come to the very end. But we're going to see the bitterness in his life and the tragedy that comes because of his bitterness. There are 6 biblical references that show us who he is. And the first one is in 2 Samuel chapter 15. Now, King David is on the throne, and in this passage where we're going, this is about when Absalom, his son, is trying to overthrow his dad. Can you say family issues, okay? Like, this is not a message about David or his family or what's going on with Absalom. I want this to be completely about Ahithophel and the angle he plays in this and why he's bitter with King David. So, verse number 10, that's kind of the background. Absalom is ready to take over, essentially, and overthrow his dad. But Absalom sent secret messengers throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, as soon as you hear the sound of the trumpet, then say, Absalom is king at Hebron. Not Florence, not Erlanger. See, there's a lot of places that's not funny, okay? I didn't think it was that funny here, but you thought it was. Thank you. Okay. With Absalom went 200 men from Jerusalem who were invited guests, and they went in their innocence and knew nothing. And while Absalom was offering the sacrifices, he sent for, here he is, Ahithophel, the Gilonite, David's counselor from his city. And the conspiracy grew strong, and the people with Absalom kept increasing. So we see that Ahithophel is David's counselor, and we see that Absalom requested him to help in rebellion against David. Now, if you're anything like me, I have questions. All right? Can I get you to come up? Chris, could you come up here for just a quick second? Frank, and then, was it Nathan? Nathan, could you come up real quick? I'm not going to make anybody do anything, I promise. So if you just want to maybe just stand right there, that's good. All right, and then if you two can stand over here, and Frank, you're over there. Or no, actually, no, I'm kidding. You go over there. Frank, you're over there. Sorry. I got confused. Good thing I know where we're going. I'm a visual learner, so this is to keep me on what I'm doing too, okay? So here's King David. Best we can do, okay? So that's the second time I'm sorry. I said I wouldn't, I would be nice, and I didn't do it. So here's King David. Here is his trusted counselor, Hushai, which we haven't mentioned yet, but we'll get there. And someone's got to be the bad guy. So here's Ahithophel. If you don't think I cast this correctly, let me remind you that a few weeks ago, he yelled at a little boy that wanted to play drums for Jesus, okay? So I stick by my casting, okay. Now here's Absalom, all right? So, son wants to overthrow father. Now let's put this in. I hope I'm not pressing any real family issues right now. I wouldn't know. I wouldn't know. I'm bitter. All right. Here's the thing. Let's put this in perspective of this church right here and right now. If I said, I don't like Pastor Jeff, and I don't want him to be the pastor here anymore, I want to be the pastor here, and I'm going to figure out how to make this happen. If I knew Chris and Jeff were like this, do you think I'm going to Chris with my plans? That doesn't make any sense. But if I know, and I'm not, again, this is all hypothetical, I'm not trying to be funny, but if I knew Frank was talking smack about Jeff, and I knew Frank had some issues with Jeff, and I knew that Frank, even though he plays his part and he does his thing, Frank would be okay with seeing Jeff fall. Who do you think I'm going to with my plans? Okay? I'm going to Frank. I know there's problems. So, in our story, David, Absalom, Hushai, haven't met him yet, Ahithophel. Here's the question. Why would he go to one of his dad's advisors and counselors unless he knew there was a problem there already? Right? Does that not make sense to you? Like, obviously this is something he's planning and he wants to happen. So he's going to be smart about it. He's going to figure out his best strategy. You don't go to the guy that you know isn't going to betray the king. You go to someone that you know there's an issue there and I'm going to exploit that to help get what I want. So you need to switch sides for me. Ahithophel, go be the bad guy, not you. You're still the wicked son. You're over here. All right, so now we're going to go to chapter 15, verse 31, to meet our other person, Hushai. Nice of you to join us, Hushai. Here's what happens. And it was told David, Ahithophel is among the conspirators with Absalom. So David knows, Ahithophel's out. Ahithophel switched sides. And David said, O Lord, please turn the counsel of Ahithophel into foolishness. So David already knows, that's not good. I don't need him over there. That's not a good thing for me. So while David was coming to the summit where God was worshipped, behold, Hushai, the Archite, came to meet him with the coat torn and dirt on his head. David said to him, if you go on with me, you'll be a burden to me. But if you return to the city and say to Absalom, I will be your servant, O king, as I have been your father's servant in the time past, so now I will be your servant. Then you will defeat for me the counsel of Ahithophel. So David says, Hushai, I love you. I know you're with me, but you're not doing me any good over here. I need you to go to the other side so that whatever Ahithophel is going to tell Absalom to do, he doesn't do it. So now he switches sides. But now, keep in mind, you go ahead, you switch. Do you like good mystery movies and stuff, right? So here's the setup. Here's where we are. Two counselors that were with King David are now with Absalom as part of the rebellion to overthrow the king. Ahithophel has got a problem, and we're about to find out. Hushai is here on behalf of the king. All right? What's that? Yes. All right? So is everybody clear on who is in this story? All right, thank you guys. You can sit down. I know it's a lot of names. They didn't do anything. What are they getting applause for? Well, there's my bitterness for the day. The guys that just stood there got applauded. Okay. And so we have the setup for the story. We have who is Ahithophel. Ooh, now there's a double agent. Does King David really trust Hushai? On the next episode, here's the thing. All joking aside, this is exactly what David's facing. His own son wants to overthrow him. One of his own counselors betrayed him and went to the rebellion. That he has to take another one of his counselors and say, I wish you could stay with me, but you're going to do me more good on that side. Make sure Ahithophel's message is rejected. And that was Hushai's entire purpose of being sent to the other side. So, the third reference is in chapter 16. And now we're going to realize with Ahithophel, it's personal. In verse number 20, then Absalom said to Ahithophel, give your counsel, what shall we do? Ahithophel said to Absalom, go into your father's concubines, whom he has left to keep the house, and all Israel will hear that you have made yourself a stench to your father, and the hands of all who are with you will be strengthened. So they pitched a tent for Absalom where? On the roof. Does that sound familiar to anybody? Anybody familiar with David and Bathsheba? When David was supposed to be out at war, but he wasn't. And then he looked and saw a woman bathing and said, bring her to me. And someone said, isn't that someone's wife? He said, bring her to me. And he got her pregnant. And then he got her husband killed in battle to try to cover it all up. Because Uriah, the soldier, wouldn't come home and be with his wife. And so David's trying to cover up the pregnancy. And all because he saw Bathsheba on the rooftop. So does this not seem a bit personal? When his counsel is, this is what you're going to do, and you're going to do it on the rooftop. See, this is where bitterness starts doing what it does. When you don't let go, it starts going places you didn't really think you might be going. And it's deeply, deeply personal. See, Ahithophel didn't just say, I want David to be dethroned. Ahithophel said, I want to humiliate him in the process. I want him to be humiliated by his own son. And I want it to happen at a place where he'll remember what he did. It's personal. But why? What is his problem? Why is he so angry and bitter with King David? When we look at that counsel of Ahithophel, it actually fulfilled a prophecy. In chapter 12, if you go back there real quick, this is where Nathan looks at David and said, David, thou art the man. Nathan says in verse number 11, thus says the Lord, behold, I will raise up evil against you out of your own house. Check. And I will take your wives before your eyes and give them to your neighbor, and he shall lie with your wives in the sight of this sun. Check. For you did it secretly, but I will do this thing before all Israel and before the sun. So this prophecy is being fulfilled when Ahithophel gives this counsel. But now, that was just kind of I want David to know. But now we're getting to what Ahithophel ultimately wants. Chapter number 17, verses 1 and 2. Moreover, Ahithophel said to Absalom, let me choose 12,000 men. This is his chance. This is his moment. This is what Ahithophel and all of his bitterness and all of his rage and all of his anger toward David has been waiting for. Let me choose 12,000 men, and I will arise and pursue David tonight. I will come upon him while he is weary and discouraged and throw him into a panic, and all the people who are with him will flee. Now look at this part. Again, tell me this isn't personal. This isn't about Absalom becoming king. This is about him having an issue with David. He says, I'm sorry, I lost my spot. We'll look up here. And I will strike down who? Only the king. He's not worried about David's followers. He's not worried about David's soldiers. He's not worried. He just wants David to die. So the first thing he wants is for David to be humiliated on the rooftop. And then he wants to personally get to kill David himself. Why do you need 12,000 men when your only objective is to kill one person? It's very personal for Ahithophel. But now, this is where Hushai comes into the mix. In verse number 5, then Absalom said, call Hushai, the Archite also, and let us hear what he has to say. Remember, this is why David sent him over there. And when Hushai came to Absalom, he gave him his counsel. We're not going to get into all the counsel, but here's the point. Here's what matters. Verse number 14. And Absalom and all the men of Israel said, the counsel of Hushai is better than the counsel of Ahithophel. For the Lord had ordained to defeat the good counsel of Ahithophel, so the Lord might bring harm upon Absalom. So Ahithophel gave his counsel. Ahithophel was all in. I want David dead. I want to do it myself, and I want to do it tonight. Enough is enough. This is my time. This is my moment. I want him dead. But Hushai gives counsel to basically say, I don't think we should do that. Again, acting as if it's all in Absalom's best interest, but who was he really trying to protect? King David. And so he steers the plan a different direction, and Absalom says, you know what, Ahithophel? Thanks, but no thanks. I'm going to go with what Hushai says. So what happens? What's the result? Has his vengeance been completed? Has his personal justice system been resolved? No. Nothing has been resolved. What is next? What's his next move? He can't go back to King David. Hey, buddy, I was just kidding. He can't go back. And now Absalom doesn't want to listen to him either. And he's not worried about whether or not Absalom becomes king. He doesn't care about that part. That was his chance. Remember we talked about how Joseph, when his brothers stood there in front of him and they didn't know who he was, that was his chance. But he'd forgiven them. Revenge was never part of the thought for him. But as soon as Ahithophel saw his moment, he took it. But it failed. It didn't go anywhere. So what happens to Ahithophel? Sadly, if you go to chapter 17 and verse number 23, here's what it says. When Ahithophel saw that his counsel was not followed, he saddled his donkey and went off home to his own city. He set his house in order. He hanged himself. And he died. Isn't that crazy? Isn't that tragic? Heartbreaking? His bitterness took him to a place where it drove every decision of his life to get that revenge. And when he couldn't get it and he realized it was over, he said, there's nothing left for me to do. And he went home and he killed himself. Can I say this with 100% complete seriousness? I am not up here today trying to say that if you're bitter, it might lead you to commit suicide. That is not the connection I'm trying to make. It's what happened here. It's exactly what happened here. But let me make this connection for you. I don't know where it will go, but it will not be a good place. Whatever bitterness is there, it cannot lead to anything that's good. So who is Ahithophel? We still don't know what his problem is. The last reference of Ahithophel is found in chapter 23, verse 34. When you get into the part of the Bible where you just kind of skim through it, because probably there's nothing important in there, right? There's something important. In verse number 34, as we're going through and listing off who these people are, Eliphalet, the son of Ashabai, I'm making these up as I go, and then it says here, Eliam, the son of Ahithophel. Does that connect the dots yet? It didn't for me either the first time. I remember thinking, wait, that's number 6. That's the last one. All I know is now that Eliam, I don't know who Eliam is. Why is that important? Why does this matter in the story? Who is Eliam? Eliam is the son of Ahithophel. It's right there. That's the last reference we have of Ahithophel. Well, that's his last reference. There's one more passage, and I'm telling you, if you've stuck with me and you're following, and prepare to have your mind blown, because like the first time I heard this, I just couldn't believe it. 2 Samuel chapter 11, verse number 1. In the spring of the year, the time when kings go out to battle, David sent Joab and his servants with him and all Israel, and they ravaged the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah. But David remained at Jerusalem. It happened late one afternoon when David arose from his couch and was walking on the roof of the king's house that he saw from the roof a woman bathing. And the woman was very beautiful. This sounds familiar, right? We know who this is. And David sent and inquired about the woman, and one said, "Is not this Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam?" See, Ahithophel was Bathsheba's grandfather. Doesn't it make a lot more sense now? Doesn't that bitterness make you at least think, oh, I get it? He heard that the king, who was not in battle, did what he did with his granddaughter. That's messed up. Now, by our system of thinking, could anybody in Bathsheba's family been a little bitter with King David for what he did? Not only did he do what he did with Bathsheba, but he then had Bathsheba's husband murdered. And Ahithophel heard what his king did to his own family. And he said, not on my watch. Not to my family, you don't. And that bitterness rooted in, and he never let go. We saw forgiveness in Joseph. We saw bitterness in Ahithophel. One resulted in God working and blessing and using his life. The other resulted in anger, tragedy, and death. So let me ask you this. Why won't you let go of whatever it is you're holding on to? Well, they have not asked for my forgiveness. So do the right thing anyways and forgive them so that there's no soil in your heart for that bitterness to root in. I forgive you because I want no part of what bitterness brings into my life. But they don't deserve it. Could you imagine if someone approached Ahithophel and said, man, listen, you got to let this go. You need to forgive King David. Forgive? forgive him, he doesn't deserve my forgiveness. And this is where I think it can hit home a little more for us in our own lives. You've been hurt. Someone somewhere has let you down. Someone has hurt you. Someone has brought you sadness and maybe brought that bitterness into your heart. And the thought of forgiving them for what they did, they don't deserve that. They don't deserve your forgiveness, not for what they did. Go ahead and put up that next verse, Ephesians 4:32. Why should you forgive, and why should I forgive? It says it right there in that verse. We need to forgive one another. Why? How? As God has forgiven us. You want to talk about not deserving forgiveness? It's my sin that put Jesus on that tree. It's your sin that Jesus left heaven, that Jesus lived a sinless life, that Jesus was betrayed and persecuted and killed on a cross so that I could be forgiven. What if Jesus had said, Father, them, they don't deserve forgiveness? That's not what he did. He made himself obedient unto death, even the death of the cross. He humbled himself. And he gave his place for you and for me. I don't deserve one shred of forgiveness from God, but I have it anyways. You may not think that person deserves your forgiveness, and you should give it to them anyways, because God's forgiven you. Another way I like to look at it is, when I mess up, I hope that person's willing to forgive me. I need to be willing to forgive as well. But you don't know what has happened to me. And this is where we think our situation is so different. I know forgiveness is good. I know we're supposed to let go. But listen to what happened in my life first, okay? Let me just tell you why I'm the exception to the bitterness thing. Let me tell you why my scenario, I get it, bitterness is bad, but just hear me out. This is why I'm so upset. All we're doing is saying, bitterness, party of one. There's room right here. Come root in and do your thing. But what do I do instead? What do I do instead of holding on? What if I don't feel like it's going the way it's supposed to? What do I feel like they're not getting what they deserve? What am I supposed to do instead of holding on to that bitterness in my life? I forgive them, and then what? Okay, I release it, I'm done, I forgive. But they're still not getting, and then we keep spinning our wheels. This morning in Bible study, I felt like the Bible study and this part of the message just went together. And if you don't come at 10 o'clock, I'm not scolding you, but you are just really, really missing out. It's a great Bible study, good conversation, and can I just tell you, we don't just have a teacher, but we have a teacher that puts the stud in Bible study, okay? I saw that shirt last week and said, that's not fair, I want one. But really, it's an amazing hour. I can be honest enough to tell you I can remember times in life that going to the Sunday school hour or Bible study hours, because that's what the good kids do and you're supposed to do that. I come to this because I just want to be a part of what it is. It's just something you should come to. But what do you do instead of holding on? Well, how about you have faith? And how about you put your faith in God? Because you might be tested. You might be tested by a situation that says, hey, bitterness is the answer. Revenge is the answer. Have a faith strong enough to stand through that test and say, no, I'll give it to God. He'll take care of it. Here's my last thing and we're done. I told you there was something this week that just kind of hit me as I was going through this again. What blessings and what path did Ahithophel miss in his life because he never let go? What work did God want to do through Ahithophel that Ahithophel never did because he spent the rest of his life being bitter? Think about that for a second. When Ahithophel was faced with that chance to be bitter and to let that take over, and really at any point on the journey, what if he would have said, God, you're in control, and I put my faith in you completely. I'm forgiving King David for what he did to my family. What's next for my life? How do you want to use me? How do you want me to walk with you? How do you want me to work for you? But we don't get that. All we get is a life that was focused on killing David for what he did. He never got it. He never found it. He had zero resolve. And then he killed himself. Can I ask you this morning, how does God want to use you? Who does God want to reach through you? But right now, he can't use you. He can't use me because we won't let go. The last thing I wrote down in my notes, and then I'll turn it over to Pastor Jeff. We forfeit the power of God on our lives to be bound by the power of bitterness when we refuse to forgive. Which power do you want over your life?